Hey, what's up? The Cabinet Vision guy here with another video podcast. I thought it would be great if we went over databases today. Not just the Cabinet Vision databases, but what a database is and how we can use them in our business. The first thing I want to cover is what is a database. A lot of people think that a database can only be made using some expensive software and has to be uber complex, but that just isn't the case. In fact, a database can be as simple as just having a text file. For instance, let me open this text file that has some data that I placed in it. You can see that this is nothing more than a list of customers with some addresses. And yes, they are fake names and addresses. You see, I'm storing the data, which then makes this text file a database. Now this is the most simple form of a database. I can't do any sorting or filtering. All I can do is scroll through and look for names and addresses. This isn't the best format for this data though. While I do only have a handful of names and addresses here, it's not really a problem. But what if I had over 1,000 lines to look at? Well, that would probably suck. Now, what's the next step up from a text file though? Well, that would be a spreadsheet. So let me go ahead and open up Microsoft Excel to show you a more advanced database setup. Now, this data isn't the same as I had in my text file I just showed you. That's because I just quickly created the text file with some false info, while this is a sample spreadsheet that I downloaded to give us some stuff to work with. This one actually has over 50,000 listings in it. Moving over to Excel gives us some more powerful functionality that we didn't have before. The most important, for this video at least, is sorting. With our text file, or what is commonly referred to as a flat file, we didn't have any sorting options whatsoever. So now if I select the A column and then go to Sort and Filter, we can see that I have some sorting and filtering options that I can use. Now if I sort by this column, Excel is going to find some data next to it and ask me for more information. If I make sure that the Expand the Selection option is selected, then click Sort, Excel will sort this data appropriately. What happens if I want to sort by more than one column though? Let's try that out. Oh no, it sorted only those two columns and left everything else exactly where it was. That's no good. This is why spreadsheets are not the best database option either, at least for me. They use what's known as a destructive method of sorting. This means that every time I sort my data, it's altered in some way. On top of that, if I need to add an additional address for a single customer, they need a whole new row, and that's just totally wasted space. For me, those are real problems, as it should be for most businesses as well. So instead of using this, let's look at the next step in database technology, a relational database. Now, I could have made a database for us to look at, but there may be a whole lot of people out there who have data like this already in an Excel spreadsheet, so I figure I would walk you through the steps of converting a spreadsheet over to a database, and in the process, we can go over what's what in a database. So we want to make this a Microsoft Access database. So I can just right-click on my desktop and select New, then Access Database. Now why an Access database? Well, it's because that's what Cabinet Vision's databases are made with, so I figured we'd use this. Plus, chances are that if you have Excel, you have Access as well. So let's rename this to My First Database and open it up. Now that we have it open, we want to do a big thing here. We want to link the external spreadsheet into our new database. Why I am doing this will be apparent in a little bit, so just hang on. So we go to the External Data tab and click on Excel. Now Access wants some information on the link. Since we only want to be able to see the spreadsheet, we're going to make sure the Link to Data Source by creating a linked table option is selected. Then we browse for our spreadsheet, which for me is on the desktop. With the file selected, Access imports the data and shows it to us. Since the first row is the name of the headers, we can just check this box to let Access know that. This will help us with our queries for the data later on. We just need to click Next so that we can name this linked table. It defaults to the name of the file, but I want to change that by adding a LNK at the beginning. It's not necessary, but it's just something I like to do. Next, we're going to want to create our first table. Instead of creating the table through Access though, we're going to use our Excel spreadsheet to make it for us. So we need to import the Excel data again. But why? We already imported it. Well, this time we're going to import the data source instead of just linking to it. This is an easy way for us to create a table. Once again, we tell Access that the first row is the column names. Then we get the ability to set up the table. So for our purposes, I want the first name, last name, and company information. The other information we'll add on later. You can see in the field options that I can change the field name, the type of data that the field will hold, and whether or not the field is indexed. If it's indexed, I can't have duplicates. So for names at least, I want to leave this unchecked. Now I can go through all the other columns and put a check into the Do Not Import Field Skip checkbox, which will prevent our new table from having all this erroneous data in it. Next, Access wants to know what the primary key column is. This is a very important column as it's the field that can uniquely identify the specific record. If we already had a primary key field in the spreadsheet, we would select it now, but since we don't, we just want to let Access make one for us. There may be instances where you don't want a primary key, which is why we can also tell Access to not have one at all, even though it may prompt us that it's a bad idea to do so. Finally, I can just name the table. Again, it's using the file name, so let's change this to Customers, and click Finish. And there we go, our first table. But it's really only part of the data. Let's go ahead and get the rest of that in there. To do that, we're going to go ahead and create a table manually this time. So I need to click on the Create Ribbon group, and then click on the Table Design button, which brings up our table designer. The designer has 3 columns for each field. The field name, which is how we call it out in a query, the data type, which tells Access how the data should be stored, and the description. We use this to give us, the database designers, more information on what this field is or what it does. Because I've set up a whole lot of databases like this in the past, I know exactly how I want this set up. So my first field will be the ID field. This will give me a unique identifier for each record, just like in our customers table. The data type will be auto number, which will make Access handle the incremental number of the ID field. Finally, the description will just be identity field, so that when I come back to this, possibly years later, I will know exactly what it is. Next, we have to have some way of knowing what customer this address is for. I could have the customer names added in, but that's just bad design, and we already have that information in the database anyways, so we just want to link the 2 tables together. To do that, I will name this field Customer ID. I want the type to be number because the ID field of my customers table is also an auto number field, and for the description, I want to write down where this link is coming from. So, links to customers.id field. This way I know that I need to look at the ID field of the customers table. The next set of fields will be simple text fields, mainly the address, city, county, state, and postal, so I will enter those in now. Now before we close this and save it, I want to make that ID field the primary key, so Access knows that this is the identity field. I just right-click on the field and select Primary Key. Finally, I can hit Ctrl-S on my keyboard and save this as Addresses, and then close the designer. Okay, so we made the table. Great, but it's empty. How do we fix that? Well, now we get to make a query. This is the query designer. It gives us an easy way to set up queries. What are queries? Well, they're functions that we can make to select, insert, update, and delete data. The first thing we have to do is select the tables that we want to use in this query. For this query, we want to use the customers table and our LNK address table. Now that we have the tables, we can close this and link our tables together. Since we know that the first name, last name, and company data is all the same in the 2 tables, we can link all of those together, from the customers table to the LNK address table. This has created what is known as a join. Access now knows that any record in the LNK address table that has the same first name, last name, and company should also have the same ID value as in the customers table. With the linking all done, we can now switch this over to an insert query, or as it's called in the query designer, an append query. The first thing that Access wants to know is where to append this data to. Since we're wanting to fill the addresses table, we will select that table from the dropdown and click OK. Now is the easy part. We just need to double click on all of the data that we want to insert. So that's the ID field of the customers table and the address, city, county, state, and zip of the LNK address table. Next, we just need to make a simple change here at the bottom. The append to row is the name of the field that the data would be inserted into. We don't want our customer ID to be inserted into the ID field of the addresses table because Access is supposed to be handling that field. So we just need to change that to the customer ID. You can see that since we named all of the addresses table fields similar to how they're named in the LNK address table, Access placed everything else right where it needed to go, which means this query is ready to go by clicking on the Run button. Access will typically warn you when you're about to insert, update, or delete records, just to make sure you didn't click on a button accidentally. But since we didn't, we can just click Yes, and we're done. We can close the query now and check out the addresses table. Awesome. 50,000 addresses were added in a matter of seconds. Cool, isn't it? Well, we do have one problem though. I don't know about you, but I haven't memorized all the customer IDs, so I have no idea who customer 13327 is. Now I could just open the customers table and find that ID, but this seems a little counterintuitive. So let's go ahead and fix that. Now you remember when we started this Access database, I called it a relational database. So let's get started on working with our table relationships. Now this isn't going to become an episode of Dr. Phil where table A is cheating on table B who loves table C. No, rather it's a way for us to connect one or more tables together to make the data more accessible. To make a relationship between two tables, we need to go to the Database Tools ribbon group and click on Relationships. Now it's blank right now, so let's go ahead and change that. First I want to add the tables that need a relationship between them. So I will right-click and select Show Tables. I want to make a relationship between the Customers table and the Addresses table, so we can add them right now. Now, the key to a relationship is, well, the keys. More specifically, a primary key and a foreign key. We can see all primary keys in the tables, namely the ID fields of both, so we don't have to go over that. The foreign key represents a unique identifier or primary key from another table. In this case, our customer ID field, in the addresses table, is what we want our foreign key to be. To make it so, we can just drag our customer's ID field over to the customer ID field. Access now wants us to specify the relationship details. We can see that our relationship type is a one-to-many, which tells us that for each customer, there could be a nearly infinite number of addresses, which is exactly what we want. Before we click Create, though, I want to check Enforce Referential Integrity. The reason for this is that, let's say I remove a customer from the list. His or her address would then be sitting in the database taking up space, which is no good. If we then check the Cascade Update related fields and Cascade Delete related records, then this is no longer a problem as Access will delete any records that are connected to the customer's table. And now we can click Create. Cool, we can easily see that our parent table has a one-to-many relationship with the child table. Now let's just close the relationships and save the changes, and move back to the customers table to see something cool. Okay, now there's a little plus by each customer's name. If we expand that out, we can see all the addresses assigned to that customer. For now, there's only one for each one. Next, we want to make another table for the contact information, like phone, fax, email, etc. So let's give it an ID and a customer ID, just like we did with the addresses table. Now we could add a phone field and a fax field and an email field, but I really don't like that. Why? Well, what if one of my customers has 2 phone lines or 3 fax lines? I have about 9 email accounts, so I assume everyone has at least that many. I would have to add a record for each of those email accounts and each of those phone lines, while leaving the phone lines or email fields or fax fields blank, and that's just not good. So instead, we're going to add a title field, which will have the information like phone, fax, email, mobile, home, whatever. Then we will add the actual value, like the phone number, the email address, and the fax number, and everything else. Finally, I want to add a notes field. This is kind of a additional catch-all for anything else that needs to be added for the contact number. I want this to be a memo field, which is like a text field, but it can hold oh so much more data. Let's see, so we set the ID field to primary key and save the table. We'll call it contacts. Before we go any further, let's set up the relationship for this just like we did with the addresses table. Now we want to populate the table again. So let's start another new query and do the same thing we did before. Add the customers table, the link addresses table, and link them together. Then we just double click on the customer's ID field, then on the LNK addresses phone field. I still want a third field though. I will make it an expression. To do that, I just need to put an open quote, enter the text I want, for this it's phone, and a closed quote. When I press enter on my keyboard, Access turned it into an expression. Now I just need to change this to an append query and set the appropriate field names in the append to row. The actual phone data should be placed in the contact value field. The expression should be placed in the contact title field. And of course, we need to place the customer ID in the customer ID field. Now Access will insert all of the phone numbers for each customer and label them as phone. When we run the query, it adds all 50,000 phone numbers to the database. Now if I simply change this field to the fax field, then change my expression to fax and run it again, it creates a new record for the fax numbers as well. Let me just do this for the email and web addresses, and we'll be done. Let's check out the contacts table now. Oh my, 200,000 records. Nice. So if we close this and look at the customers table, we can expand out a customer, and this time Access found multiple links, so it wants us to choose one. I'll choose the contacts, and voila, all the contacts for that customer. And now we can look at what the power of moving everything over to a relational database can give us. Let's say, for whatever reason, I need to send out a letter to all of my customers. The content of the letter doesn't matter at this point, I just have to send one. I don't want to handwrite my labels that will go on all of the envelopes. I just want to purchase some labels from my local office supply store and print them out so I can peel them and stick them on. An easy way to do that is 2 parts. The first is to create our first select query so that we can select a specific set of data. So we go over to the query designer and add the customers and addresses tables. We can see that Access has already linked them together properly based on the relationship that we created earlier. For this label, I want the first name of each customer, the last name of each customer, the company, and all of the appropriate address information. Once I have all that, I can run the query and see the results. So now we can see that I have successfully joined all of the information in the two tables together to get a nice little result that I can use for labeling. We just have to save the query, which I will do by closing it and selecting yes when Access asks me if I want to save it. And let's call this query customer addresses. Now that the query is saved, I don't have to write it anymore. I can just double click on it and see the results. This is a really powerful way to sort and filter my data that I have in my database. The best thing about this method is that it's non-destructive, meaning that no matter how I filter or sort this, my original data is left alone. Part 2 of this would be to now create the labels. Why don't we just create the labels directly off the customers table and the addresses table though? Because Access doesn't like to do that. That's why. So with the customer addresses query selected, we want to click on the little labels button here to bring us to our label designer. This is a really simple, straightforward process. The first step is to select our label and set the basic settings. I'm just going to select a random label. This Avery 8930 works for me. If the label you have isn't in the list, you can customize it. Since we don't need to, I'm just going to click Next. Here we would select the font and the font details like color and size that we want the label to be printed in. This looks good to me, so again, I will just click Next. And this is the label designer. The prototype label, here on the right, allows us to see the basic format of the end labels. So let's get to designing it. I want the first name to be placed on the label, so I will double click on that field. You see how it put that item in the label? This is how our designer looks to us, but it will put the proper information in when we're done. Next, I need to add a space, so I'll press the space bar on my keyboard, and then I can add the last name. Now I want to start a new line, so I will just press the Enter key on my keyboard. On this line, I want the company name. Now I can go ahead and start adding the address information. First, we need a new line with the street address. Then we need another new line with the city, the state, and the postal code. Excellent. I hope you noticed that I did add the proper spacing as well as a comma to separate the city and state. Since this is done now, we can click Next. Now we're almost done with this label. All we have to do here is select how we would like the labels sorted. Basically, I want to sort by state, then city, then by the company name. The order in which we place the sorting items matters, so make sure you put everything in the proper order. Again, I will click Next. Finally, we're pretty much done. We just need to give the labels a name and tell Access what we want to do after we click Finish. I like the name the way it is, and I just want to see a nice print preview, so we will leave this all alone and click Finish. Now, this warning isn't anything too bad. It's just Access telling us that some info may not fit on our label. Since we aren't actually printing this, it's no big deal. But if we were, then we'd have to modify the label to make sure all the data is placed on it properly. And there we have it, a list of the various labels that Access made for us. It's only showing one page, but if I go to the Zoom group, I can change it to something like 12 pages to get a better look. If I wanted to see all of them, I could close this print preview and then double click on my label report and see all of them. Before we finish this up, I want to show you something that you can do if you have Cabinet Vision Solid Ultimate and Microsoft Access. There is a warning that I would like to give you though. What I'm about to show you can be potentially dangerous to your Cabinet Vision databases, and you shouldn't do this on your production databases without backups. In fact, you probably shouldn't do this on those databases at all. Rather, make copies of those databases and work with those instead. So with that warning out of the way, we can move over to a database that I made that links into my reports.mdb. Yep, not only can you link into Excel files, you can pull linked data from other Microsoft Access files as well. We can see that I have only brought in the cabinets table, the job info table, and the rooms table. If I look at these tables, you can see that they are full of data that was placed by Cabinet Vision by just running the report center. You can also see this query, which is nothing more than a query to join all the relevant data together. Finally, you can see the pièce de résistance. the cabinet labels. This is a really nice little feature of Access that you can use in case you don't want to drop the money on crystal reports. With all that you saw me do with our addresses, you should easily be able to recreate this and other reports or labels as you need them. Now it's time to finally end this episode. I hope you enjoyed learning about Microsoft Access and see what a proper database can do for your business. If you have any questions on how to do something in Access, feel absolutely free to post it on my Facebook or Google Plus page, and I will answer it as best I can. Once again, I would like to thank Hayfla for their continued support of this podcast, and I will now leave you with today's quote.